Now we're going to review the big picture, the big idea from the previous videos that you watched. And if you will complete this statement on your notes guide, what development is, and development is measured by. Now, how do we know how a country is doing? We look at their Human Development Index. And a Human Development Index includes economic, social, and demographic factors. And in these, you have gross domestic product, literacy rate, life expectancy, and infant mortality. When we're looking at human development, we're going to look at the per capita gross domestic product. And in the per capita, it gives you the average GDP of a country divided by the total population. So you're able to get a better picture of how much the average citizen brings home during a year. Now this map is a representation of how many people in a region live on up to $10 a day. Okay, so if you notice, the bigger the country, the bigger the proportion of the country, the more people in that region live on up to $10 a day. So if you notice, here's the United States, and I want you to compare it to places in the Eastern Hemisphere. Here is India. In 7 out of the 12 regions, more than half of the people live in households where the people live on below $10 a day. In Central Africa, as you can see, 95% of the households have workers earning this little. And you have Western Europe and Japan that have less than 1% of their population that lives on less than $10 a day. Now I want you to take a minute and think about what you see in this map and discuss it with your neighbor. Now when we compare per capita GDP in the countries of USA and Malawi, as you can see in USA, the per capita GDP would be $46,860 versus Malawi, which is $821. Now, if you think about it, what would be some of the challenges living in Malawi? The Human Development Index also measures life expectancy. Now, in the United States, the life expectancy is 78 years old. And that is that the person, this is an average healthy person, lives to be 78 years old, versus a person in Uganda, which lives to be up to 53 years old, granted that they are healthy as well. What do you think are some of the factors that contribute to the rise in life expectancy? Another human development indicator is literacy rate. So as you can see, you have literacy rate in the United States is 99% versus Mali at 23%. Now, earlier we talked about life expectancy. Again, there was a 20-year difference between the United States and a country in Africa. How could literacy rate also contribute to the rise in life expectancy? Now, expected years of education is also another factor that we look at, and that is just measuring how long a person is in school. So in Australia, a person is in school an average of about 20 years versus Turkey, which is an average of about 10 years. Now, infant mortality rate. Now, this is for every 1,000 children in Afghanistan, 149 do not make it past their first birthday. versus Japan, where out of every 1,000 children, 2 of them do not make it to their first birthday. What do you think are some contributors to the high infant mortality rate in Afghanistan? You will discuss this with your partner. Now on this slide, you see that we are comparing people. So you have your top 5 richest person. You have Late Show for top 10. You have athletes. You have best and worst dressed. You have Billboard, the top 100 hits. Now the same thing happens with countries. They are also ranked by their success levels. Now here you have a Human Development Index map. So if you'll take a minute to analyze this map with your partner and come up with 3 ideas from this map and be ready to share out with the class. Now here we have a list of the characteristics that make up a more developed country and a less developed country. On your notes guide, you have a chart, and you are going to use the information on this page to complete your chart. So if you'll take a second to do that. So when you think of a more developed country, think of if you can sleep in a bed, if you put your food in a refrigerator, you have clothes in a closet, you either drive or walk to school, and there are paved roads in your neighborhood, and there is a doctor or a dentist available to you, then you live in a more developed country. In a less developed country, you would most likely be sleeping on the floor. You would probably not have anything to eat. And when I say anything, that means there is nothing in the refrigerator and there is not a cabinet where you can go to for a snack. You probably only have 1 set of clothing, and you probably, if you even are allowed or have the option, you probably walk about 6 miles to go to school. And the chances of there being a doctor or a dentist available to you is very minimal. Now let's take a look at this map that indicates total water use in the world. Now, as you can see, the bigger the proportion of the country, the more water that is used in that area. Now, what countries do you see to use the most water? And the United States is one. India is also another one. And China. These are also the territories that have the most people. But water use per person is about 3 times higher in the US than it is in India and China. And we know that everybody needs water, but everybody uses water in different quantities. On average, people living in Central Africa, and here you have it, only use about 2% of the water used by each person living in North America. What does this tell you about the levels of development and the consumption of resources in a country? Now your answer should have been something along the lines of, the more developed a country is, the more they are going to use or consume natural resources. Now earlier we talked about birth rates and death rates. Now in this map you have a proportionate map that shows you poor water quality in the regions around the world. So again, here's the United States, and notice the proportion is a lot smaller, meaning that we have more access to safe drinking water. Now, drinking water is essential to live, but dirty drinking water is also a major contributor to diseases. Now, here in Western Africa, most of the people living here can access safe water. But in Central Africa, only about 50% of people living here can access safe drinking water. The population without access to safe tap water, the largest population, is China. That means about 25% of the world's population does not have access to safe drinking water. Now, how does this contribute to human development? Now, is there something that we can do to solve the problem? Now, let's take a look at women working in agriculture. Now, out of all the female agricultural workers in the world, 39% of these women live in India. Indian pastoral agriculture includes farming cattle, water buffalo, goats, poultry, sheep, and fish. Over half of the female agricultural workers in the world are in Southern Asia. Now let's compare it to the men working in agriculture. This map of where the men who are farmers live and work shows a broadly similar distribution, where you have a large population in India also working in agriculture. However, a larger portion of male agricultural workers in the world are also found in Brazil and Colombia, as well as Mexico, as compared to the female. There are 1.4 million agricultural workers to every female agricultural worker in the world. What does this tell you about human development in countries where you have a large percentage of people working in agriculture? Now, this map is an indicator of undernourished population, and this shows you over the 10-year period from 1990 to 2000. The number of people living in the world that lived on an inadequate amount of food increased from 840 million to 858 million. Due to population increases over this period, the percentage of the population that is undernourished is simultaneously decreased from 16 to 14%. Of all the people living in Central Africa, over 60% of their population is undernourished.